this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 4 of the House of Commons Subcommittee on International Human Rights. Pursuant to the order of reference of October 27th, the subcommittee is meeting for the continuation of the briefing on the current situation in Nigeria, as well as a briefing on the current situation in Zimbabwe. We will then move in camera at the end of the meeting to discuss the work plan for our COVID study. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format and is also one of the first meetings as part of the House of Commons pilot project for webinar formats. This pilot project is for public committee meetings and is available only to members and their staff. Members may have remarked that the entry to the meeting was much quicker and that they immediately entered as an active participant. All functionalities for active participants remain the same. Staff will be non-active participants only and can therefore only view the meeting in gallery view. I'd also like to thank the witnesses for helping us with this pilot project. I trust that the experience will be a good one. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted, and also highlight the fact that this was mentioned by Speaker Rhoda on September 29th, 2020. So to ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. I'm gonna start with one. It's not so much a rule, but I do have, when there's kind of a minute left to your time, I'll put one of these up, and then maybe even a 30-seconder when there's 30 seconds left to help the members with their time allocation. And thank you, Ikra, for that. That's something that she uses at her committees, and I guess works very well. Interpretation in this video conference will work very much like in regular committee meetings. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you're ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. When you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. We will now begin with the current situation in Nigeria, and I'd like to welcome our witness, possibly witnesses. So from the Nigerian Canadian Association here in Ottawa, we have the president, Mr. Imahe Abe. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for having me and for giving me an opportunity to speak. Good evening to honorable members as well, for the time provided for me. I want to acknowledge that my presentation today, has contributions from very wide, consultation from the NSAS Canada, from Canadian Association of Nigerian Physicians and Dentists, from the National Association of CDOCs, Nigerian Canadian Association of Newfoundland and Labrador, Saskatchewan, and Nova Scotia, Greater Toronto Area, Hamilton, Vancouver, and Calgary. So my presentation has been after, due consultation with all of these organizations. My testimony today will focus mainly on helping you provide a deeper insight into the root cause of the problems and the reasons Nigerians, particularly the youths, have had enough and have started a protest that has gone all around the world. The NSAS protest in Nigeria and around the world is in response to a government that has refused to pay attention to the needs of people. It's a government that has refused, that has abandoned its key responsibilities to protect lives and property. The protests serve to ignite and unmask many years of negligence of the government to seriously address societal issues and reverse its undermining and weakening of institutions of government. SARS, which is a special anti-robbery squad, is one of the institutions of government that is a product of a severely broken system. After many years of oppression and loss of trust in the government, the people of Nigeria have taken to the streets to protest against police brutality, especially perpetrated by the SARS. Sadly, on the 20th of October 2020, unarmed peaceful protesters were flagrantly shot by the military at the Lekki toll gate in Lagos and in other parts of Nigeria. And this helped in exacerbating the situation. The situation was made due to insecurity and lack of jobs and poverty, lack of a national agenda to promote action-based and equitable national development, poorly structured system of government that honors and celebrates mediocrity, injustice and lack of confidence in the judicial system, to be fair, poorly funded education and healthcare and corrupt practices. And to make it worse, Islamic fundamentalist Boko Haram has morphed into a fully armed Fulani headsman and occupying the forests of the Middle Belt and South of Nigeria, killing, extorting, raping, and killing children, women, and men. The Nigerian security forces, have responded with showmanship efforts. And I'll provide examples of why, these statements has been made. And these are particularly from people that are in high authority. And I'll quote Ali Ndume, who is the chair, Senate Committee on Army, in a committee briefing, expressed great regret, calling on the Nigerian government to bring those involved with Boko Haram terrorist activities to book. He expressed his disagreement on the government's continuing failed radicalization of terrorist programs, resettling, reintegrating, and pampering of Boko Haram terrorists. He specifically cited the beheading of Malams. And Malams are senior Muslims and spiritual leaders. 75 of them were taken to an abattoir and slaughtered by Boko Haram terrorists. Now, these terrorists were brought in by the Nigerian government as repentant terrorists, even with the evidences of their continuing activities. Recently, after the shooting at the Lekki toll gate, Nigerian government, instead of responding, to cries, by the youth, has gone into a public campaign. Now, as revealed by Nima Elbager, who is a CNN senior international correspondent, she revealed that live ammunitions were used at peaceful protesters at the Lekki toll gate shooting on October 28th in Lagos, Nigeria. Ayola Kasim, who's also a reporter by popular TV channels Television News, reported that the Nigerian Police College recruit in training is fed with a budget of only 150 naira, which is the equivalent of 45 Canadian cents per day. Now, one cannot be trained to serve and to protect with a 45-cent meal daily budget. The system has been programmed to produce officers who will brutalize and abuse human rights. So my witnessing today is not to cast doubt as to the men and women who serve within SARS, but to witness that SARS is also an element of the failed structure. So the women and the men who work within SARS, who brutalize Nigerians, are also victims of the system. Complete systemic overhaul, or which includes not only just SARS but all other arms of the government, is seriously needed. Agnes Callamard, who is a United Nations special reporter, now after a 12-day investigative tour of Nigeria, which was done in September 2019, concluded that Nigeria is a pressure cooker of internal conflicts and generalized violence that must be addressed urgently. The overall situation encountered in Nigeria gave rise to extreme concern, as stated by the report. Nigeria is confronting both national, regional, and global pressures, such as population explosion, regional and global issues, an increased number of people living in absolute poverty, climate change, desertification, and increasing proliferation of weapons. This has reinforced local systems and countrywide patterns of violence, many of which are seemingly spinning out of control, the report concluded. All of this comes together to say that there's a loss of trust and confidence in public institutions, which have prompted Nigerians to take matters of protection into their own hands, which is leading to proliferation of vigilante groups, self-protecting armed militia, and cases of jungle justice, has become really very common in Nigeria. Now, instead of the government to respond through dialogue and listening to the pains of Nigerians to reverse the state of hopelessness, the government has sadly chosen a dictatorship-style iron hand to hunt down and to arrest leaders of the peaceful protesters and charge them with acts of terrorism against the country and freezing, and in some cases, freezing of their bank accounts, while pampering the actual terrorists who are still running rampage against innocent Nigerians. This is exactly why the people are protesting. This is why they call for urgent help from international community, especially from Canada, and to put pressure on the Nigerian government.
Thank you very much.
Hope that, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amiabi. I'm sure the members have many questions for you that you can elaborate on much of what you have said. And starting off with our questions will be from the Liberals, Ms. Anita Van Belt.
Yes, thank you very much. And I want to thank you for being here, Mr. Imahiabi. I understand that you are actually a teacher at a school in my riding of Ottawa West Nepean at St. Paul's. And I just wanted to thank you again for the work you do there and also for being here as a witness. I heard your testimony and you talk about systemic problems, about institutional overhaul. But our understanding from the previous witnesses is that there's been a real deterioration since the 20th of October, since the protesters were so violently repressed, since we were starting to see more arrests. Could you say that this is something that is deteriorating at the moment in terms of freedom of expression, in terms of civil society, human rights defenders? And if that's the case, that there's been a real deterioration recently, what can be done immediately in order to try to bring that public space back so that those institutions can then be, as you put it, overhauled?
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, I'm a vice principal at St. Paul within your riding. Thank you. Yes, since the incidence of the shooting, there has been an escalated attempt to forcibly arrest, detain, and in some cases, like I said earlier, freeze the bank accounts of those that are seen as leaders of the protest. An atmosphere of fear has been created, and most of the leaders have gone into hiding. Some of them have fled the country in order to save themselves, because they need to be alive to be able to push for change, to happen. What can be done? It's an urgent and an immediate response, from peace-loving countries like Canada, to put pressure on the government of Nigeria that the response to peaceful protesters asking for change, asking for better governance, is not to actually perpetuate more violence and against those who have put their life at risk to call for change in a country.
To what extent is social media playing a role in this? I know that there's an End SARS hashtag, and there's certain videos that have gone viral in terms of what the government has done. Is there a role for social media for amplifying those voices, for communicating, and to what extent is there freedom within Nigeria for people to be able to spread this information through social media?
As far as I know, social media has played a significant role in helping bring about, bring to light the realities of what is happening in Nigeria. But there has been there are TV news clips, of the Minister of Information looking, for ways on how the social media can be banned or gagged. That's in Nigeria, and this is in line with what we have always seen when citizens, call, for better governance. There's always a clampdown, to create the atmosphere of fear, so that when they get on their own, then the movement is squashed, and that is the tactics, that we're continuing to see sadly, and we hope that the international community, can quickly, put out, strong statements and actions, to remind the government of its commitment, to human rights. And and to add to that, Nigeria is a signatory, to the African Charter on Human Rights and People's Rights, and also the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which places obligation of Nigeria to not only promote but to protect human rights in Nigeria. So a reminder, a strong reminder, and the consequences of not following through on those commitments, I think, will be a very good start.
Yes, thank you very much. And that's one of the reasons our committee today is doing these hearings. One of the things we heard in the previous testimony is about gender-based violence, that in fact, when some of the women who are being arrested, some of the protesters, they're actually being sexually assaulted, sexually abused in custody, and that there seems to be a particular gender-based violence against women, human rights defenders, women who are journalists. Could you tell us a little bit about what you are hearing about what's happening to women who are trying to stand up against these abuses?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I do not have any specific example to cite, but knowing the strength of the institutions of government in Nigeria, those in custody, if you are in custody in Nigeria, it's a very difficult place to be. So I can also imagine that for a woman, to be in custody under very difficult and harsh conditions, I wouldn't want to be in that situation myself. So I definitely, would buy into, situations where, care and respect is not being given, to women. They may be treated as, even more harsh, just because they are women. How dare a woman stand up for, for the right thing?
Am I out of time,
Thank you.
Chair?
Yes, you are,
Okay,
Ms. Vandenbeld.
sorry.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to be moving to the Conservatives and Mr. Chu for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Imahabe, for coming to the subcommittee here. Through your speech, I get a sense that you are trying to stick the blame to the system. You're trying to not to blame it on SAS. You were saying that the SAS failure is it's an indication of a system that is actually failing. But from what we have witnessed, in history around the world, there is no such thing as a system. Every individual in a society has to take up the responsibility and own up to it. To that end, there is a Nigerian constitution. And according to the Nigerian constitution, it grants an exception from the right to life for reasons such as a suppression of riot, insurrection, or mutiny. Do you believe the army or the SAS, the police, do you think they are abusing this exception granted them in Constitution? Because from the outside, it looks like evidence has presented itself. There are recent attacks on protesters violating this. So therefore, they have to be taken to task for not protect or abusing their exception ability.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. Why my focus is on systemic failure is that no good agency or arm of government can function under a system that cannot guarantee, proper channeling of ways, for complaints or where your rights are not guaranteed. If you go into the judicial system, you're not guaranteed your rights. If a SARS officer violently shoots or kills an individual, the rights of that individual is not guaranteed. There's no accountability. No one has been found that I know has been found guilty that has been shot by SARS. And there are hundreds of cases, innocent people, even bystanders, that are shot down. There's no evidence of an inquiry that has taken up a case by SARS and it has gone to a conclusion, and the officers, are found guilty. These are because of systemic failures from those institutions of government, to the individual. So sometimes we rely on individuals, to be honest and true. However, in a system where nothing is guaranteed, then it becomes really very difficult. Now, from your question on the issue of an overreach, by the army and the SARS, yes, there are provisions, for these agencies to come in and where the protesters are overreaching. However, what we saw, from the EndSARS protesters has been largely peaceful until the shooting and the killings started. And of course, there are clear evidence that the protesters were very organized and respectful, clean up the streets after their protest. They were really very well organized and they were respecting laws and they were not breaking laws. After the shooting and the killing, of course, it led to gangs and mobs, taking over the protest and looting and rioting and burning and all that. But before the shooting itself, it was a very well coordinated and put together, respectful, peaceful protest. But the killing led to, those with the wrong intentions now taking it over. So I'm here to testify that the taking over by those with the wrong intentions is also an evidence of systemic failure, because due to the killing, due to the rampaging on those with the right intentions, it led to the thugs and other people with the wrong intentions now coming to take over, and the police find themselves not being able to control what happened in the aftermath. Yeah.
Thank you. In the limited news reports that we have received from outside of Nigeria here, we have heard that it is common for police to pressure victims to withdraw their reports of crimes and to take repercussive action against victims who proceed with filing those reports. Would you be able to speak to the extremes of these recursive action and the type of reports that the police would go to so far as an extent to prevent from being filed?
Yes, due to the brutal nature of responses when witnesses uh, come forward, or when innocent people are picked up, to witness, because they understand that the system cannot guarantee their, their release, from the judicial system. They are left, with nothing other than, to try to play game, as they will say, so as to free themselves.
Okay, thank you. One last question, Chair, if I have the time.
Mr. Chu, you're pretty much out of time.
Okay, thank you.
But thank you, Mr. Chu. And now we'll move to the block and welcome Madame LaRouche to our subcommittee for 7 minutes.
Merci. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is the first time I sit on this committee. First of all, I'd like to welcome Mr. Machabie. I'd like to point out the courage that people have in meeting these challenges. I know that we all know that violence leads to violence. So thank you very much for your testimony today. My first question to you, this is the International Human Rights Day, but most acts of violence are arbitrary, and they're usually carried out against young men. So what characterizes the situation in Nigeria where these people are victim of SARS? And we talked about men, but there's also women and children who are hard hit by this violence committed by SARS. Could you give us some more details, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. Like I said earlier, SARS was constituted for the right reasons. To, as the name, sounds, is a special anti-robbery squad, in response, to issues of robbery in Nigeria. However, the SARS men and women are poorly paid. They are poorly trained. So when they get out there, what happens now? There's a tendency to take out that issue against the people that they're supposed to serve and protect. Now, adding this to all like the other societal issues that's happening in the country, the youth, particularly the young people of Nigeria, had to come together to press for systemic change. And SARS, although it's named End SARS, however, the push and the request is for a complete systemic change and to press for good governance, where the life expectancy can be improved, where people can actually conduct business safely without being harassed, without being killed in the streets, without being robbed. So the overall essence of End SARS was to push for systemic change. And this was done by not only young men or young women, but all young people of Nigeria. It was a collective effort, by everyone to come together and push for change. Unfortunately, what we have seen and experienced in Nigeria is that there's repression to repress that push for change, to bring about good governance. And the government has come with an iron fist to squash that request. And unfortunately, the government has also currently gone into an overdrive, and made this a public campaign, about whether people were shot or not.
Oui. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, we hear about this brutality. I'd like to hear you are in Canada. You're appearing before a House of Commons committee. How can the government of Canada support people in Nigeria? What can we do? What we know that human rights violations contribute to terrorism. So, what can Canada do to improve the situation in Nigeria? So violations of human rights does in fact contribute to all this pain that we see in Nigeria.
Thank you very much for that question. Some very practical things that the government of Canada can really do, is to press the government of Nigeria, to constitute credible, independent investigations and demand justice for all victims of police brutality and restoration of fundamental human rights. And this can be done by compensating the victims of NSAS, of SARS itself. I'm sorry, and to prosecute perpetrators. No one has ever been prosecuted, for killing or maiming or even extorting people. And there are many evidences of this occurrence. And we have not seen, an independent inquiry, that has, successfully, brought anyone to book. Also put pressure for proper training and to offer fair wages to police personnel so that people that are well paid and trained can be out on the street to serve and to protect. The people that are trained right now are not on the street to serve and to protect. They are out every day looking for their own livelihood. And these are people that are armed. When people are armed on the street looking for their livelihood, that's like armed robbery.
And in talking about terrorism, could you talk a little bit about Boko Haram? We know that there have been a lot of young women and children that were victims of this terrorist group.
Thank you very much for that question. Now, the young people of Nigeria rose up, not just because of SARS. They've had enough. One of the biggest issues that the country faces is fully armed Boko Haram that has morphed as Fulani headsmen, and they have moved from the north of Nigeria all the way down south. They have covered the middle belt and the south of Nigeria and occupied the forest of Nigeria. And these are armed people. Every day, on daily basis, they are kidnapping people, extorting people, raping women and children, and asking for ransom. And there have been cases where even some international,
Thank you. And now we're moving to the NDP, and Monsieur Belloris, welcome, I think for the first time to our subcommittee.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to say I am very happy to be here today with you this evening. I have a preliminary question so that I'm sure that I really understand the political situation in Nigeria. Are we dealing with specialized police forces, such as the SARS, that are completely out of control, that have a lot of autonomy in carrying out arrests, in torturing at times? Do you think there's a direct linkage between the government of Nigeria and its police force? We're dealing with police members who are out of control, but they are responding to orders, no?
Yes, thank you for that question. The structure is broken. And I'll try to create a clear picture to see, and this is very clear why there's a big problem. And I'll bring it home here to Canada. If in Canada, every police force or unit takes direct orders from the Prime Minister, you agree with me that that is the big problem. There's no Ottawa police. There's no provincial police. There's no such police. It's a one national police. and they take direct orders from the prime minister directly, then that's a big problem. That's exactly what is happening in Nigeria. And that's why people are calling to restructure the system. For several years, we've been calling for local policing in Nigeria. But of course, there's always an enormous pushback to those calls, because those calls does not serve the interest of those who want to keep the status quo. The government knows that localizing police force in Nigeria would work and it will serve the people. Nigeria is a big country with over 200 million people. Now, you would agree with me that one unit of police force cannot serve the interest of 200 million people, because the cultures are different from north to south of Nigeria, from the east to the west of Nigeria. Cultural systems and different other systems, such that only local policing will properly understand the issues on ground to be able to respond effectively. So orders come from one unit, and it comes from the presidency all the way down. And that's why, it will be very helpful, if we can, Nigeria can receive strategic support in the area of policing in Nigeria. That would help enormously in coming about in bringing about part of the solution that we face in Nigeria.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I'd like to ask you a question about the Nigerian community. You're aware of the community here in Ottawa and in Ontario, but how can Nigerians who live here in Canada, how can they assess the reaction of the government? You've offered some options, some solutions, but generally speaking, do people in your community feel that we've done enough, or do they feel that they've been left to their own devices?
Thank you. Before presenting to you, I have done, I read out a whole list of communities that I have consulted, and the feeling is the same. As Nigerian Canadians, we're very happy and lucky, to be in a country where there are laws, where, when you work hard, there's reward. When you follow the law, there's reward. And if you're accused wrongly, there's a process that will prove that you were wrongly accused. And we're very grateful, to be in a country where such rights are guaranteed. It's not the same in Nigeria, and we know that, and we have family in Nigeria. I have my parents my mom is in Nigeria. I am forced to travel to Nigeria quite often so as to take care of her. We, the community here, we feel, that there's a connection between us and Nigeria, because Nigeria is a very important country in Africa. It's about a fifth of the entire continent in terms of the number of people in the country alone. It holds a very strong strategic ground. If the country Nigeria goes out of control, the entire Africa is going to go with it. And that's a known fact. And that's why we're very concerned in our community that the government of Canada can do more to help to bring about stability in that country, to bring about a peaceful existence in that country, so that people can actually prosper in that country. Right now, that is not the case. And we hope, that this will be...
I just have 1 moment remaining. I see the chair is signaling this to me. I'd like to ask you one final question in the time remaining. You gave some options that Canada could consider: training police forces, restructuring the judicial system, having trials for people who have committed crimes or who have violated human rights. But if the government of Nigeria does want to hear anything, to hear about this, should Canada take any diplomatic or economic measures to force the Nigerian government's hand?
Yes, of course. We support any measure, diplomatic, economic, to force the hands. And there are many leverages that we think that Canada is an important country that has a whole lot of leverages. Many countries respect Canada. Canada has many allies that respect the wishes of Canada. And I'm sure that if Canada pushes, its allies, to put pressure on Nigeria to bring about change, you will be impacting the lives of over 200 million people. That's what that would do for people.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And so we are now moving into our second round, although members, there will be enough time for one questioner, and that will be Mr. Zuberi for 5 minutes from the Liberals.
I'd like to thank you for being here and for speaking with us this evening on this very important issue, for your courage and for your activism over the past, what I'm guessing is quite a long time, several months and years. So the advocacy work you do is extremely important in educating Canadians and us also in terms of how to move ahead. In my riding of Pierrefonds Dollard, there are many Nigerian refugees that I've gotten to know, befriend, and have worked with. So I'm sensitive to the concerns that you're bringing up. I'd like to, and I'm somewhat familiar with the challenges in the country. I know that there are a lot of economic challenges. There's government corruption. There are extremist groups on the ground also. How has Nigeria handled the security challenges and balancing that with human rights when compared to other jurisdictions, other countries with similar challenges as Nigeria has? How would you rate Nigeria's handling of these challenges and balancing security and human rights?
Thank you for that question and for expressing your interest in bringing about solution to Nigeria. In terms of balancing security challenges in Nigeria and human rights, it's really very sad to note that the security challenges that has been brought on Nigeria, from extremist groups, from the sub-Saharan Africa all the way coming down into Nigeria, it has been dealt with what we'll say almost non-existent, or giving up kind of, way. We believe that the entire north of Nigeria is kind of open and porous, for terrorist groups to actually operate and actually come into Nigeria and find their way all the way down to the middle belt, which is the central Nigeria and the south of Nigeria. And the situation is very dire, for the people. Every day we hear of cases of kidnapping. And so these groups have now, put themselves into little batches of kidnap, gangs. They stay in the forest, come onto the highway, stop vehicles, forcefully kidnap them and take them back into the forest, and now ask for ransom. This is now very well common and open in Nigerians are now afraid to travel the roads. The last time I traveled to Nigeria, I had to, like in every journey, even some journey that's even just about an hour, have to fly it. It is unknown in Nigeria to rely on flying from one part of the country to another. But because of the security challenges, getting onto the highway to travel, it's like surrounding yourself to these, terrorist groups to take you into the forest and ask for huge amounts of ransom money. So those are the that's kind of response. And the government is aware of the presence of these groups in the forest. However, the focus is on brutalizing people that are living peacefully and leaving alone those who are the actual terrorist group. And that's why I gave an example of, the chair of the Senate Committee on Army, who testified before his own committee of 75 Boko Haram members who were already pardoned and have said to be reintegrated into the society, they were slaughtered. 75 old men, seniors, who were taken from their homes and slaughtered. That is the security situation that, unfortunately, has brought about EndSARS protest. And the response of the government is actually to suppress it instead of calling for a dialogue to have a better understanding and provide, effective response to improve the security situation.
Thank you.
Mr. Zuberi, we're pretty much out of time. We
Yes.
want to, but we at this time we do want to thank Mr. Amiyabi first for coming before the committee with your testimony, for imparting all of this information on us, for your advocacy for human rights in Nigeria, and also for being on the front lines here, during this COVID pandemic. At your school as the vice principal. So thank you very much on behalf of all committee members. Thank you. Members, we are, as we go into our second panel, we'll be suspending at this time. Thank you. like to make a few comments for the benefit of the new witnesses. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you're ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Interpretation in this video conference will work very much like a regular committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. When you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. I would now like to welcome our witnesses regarding the situation in Zimbabwe. We have, I think, 3 representatives so far right now from Zim Lives Matter. And as I understand, each of you will be making a brief opening statement. If you can make that statement a little briefer than it was going to be, so that our members can get to questions that I'm sure they will all want to ask you. I don't know if you have any particular order in terms of how you would like to start. I'll just go by how you came onto our session, and we'll be starting with Mr. Gumbiro as our first speaker for 3 minutes.
Honorable Chair, we do have an order, so I am going to pass it on to Tsitsi Gadza for the
Sure.
opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening,
Ms.
honorable
Gadza.
members. Good evening, honorable members. We thank you for
I think we're having bad reception with the internet, clerk.
providing this platform
Ms.
for
Gadza.
myself and my colleagues to be
Ms.
able to
Gadza?
share insights about the crisis in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, once known.
Yeah, we're having difficulties hearing
hear
you.
me?
It because of the internet connection, I believe, Miss Gadza. So we may have to change that, Mr. Gambiro, and
Yes.
the order
Am I
of.
clear?
You are not. Your internet connection is very poor.
Excuse me.
Honorable members, I'll just proceed with maybe opening remarks. We're here to discuss the issue in Zimbabwe concerning human rights abuse, the economic decline, and we will sort of go through that through our presentation with all the witnesses. I was going to speak specifically to the economic hardships that we face in Zimbabwe and provide a brief history of how it started, where we are right now, and sort of maybe the recommendations that we're asking from the Canadian government. As far as history goes, we can trace back the economic decline in Zimbabwe to 1997, when the Reserve Bank, through the government, printed money to pay off the war veterans in a plea to gain political capital. What followed next was hyperinflation, a decline in the economy, which to this day hasn't quite recovered. Coupled with sort of the poor economy, Zimbabwe is very reliant on agriculture, and the sort of poor climate hasn't helped the cause, as we witnessed cyclones in the following years, 2002, 2004, 2012, 16, 17, 19, and most recently 2020. Because we're so reliant on agriculture, families have nothing to feed. Job losses are high. Unemployment is at an all-time high. As I go through sort of the slides or the material that is in front of you, we've basically faced a 20-year decline in the economy. With poor fiscal plans from the government, poor infrastructure, and if I may note, ever since independence, the country has not gained in any way. It's sort of looked back, with the current government, obviously creating the poor economic climate. One of the graphs we wanted to show was sort of the Zimbabwean annual GDP growth, dating back to the 1980s, which is when Zimbabwe attained its independence. Was high, faced a decline, and has been sort of ups and flows, going up and down. And most recently in the 2000s, because of the sort of history I gave about money supply, the economy has been in the doldrums. What we try to provide is also a high level, GDP information to show sort of where we are as a country. And inflation right now stands at about 319%. Just to put that in perspective, if you go to the grocery store today and try to buy bread at $5, by the time you come back tomorrow morning, you won't be guaranteed for the same price. And meanwhile, wages are not moving accordingly, and which is causing so much stress on the people of Zimbabwe. We are aware that the Canadian government has the ability and is able to support, through its works as a top 10 donor in the Commonwealth. So with that in mind, we're sort of asking the Canadian government to commit to work with NGOs in Zimbabwe to establish a better economy, to lead the stance to denounce human rights to the UN, to lift a moratorium on Zimbabweans to emigrate to Canada, to facilitate that, they can come in and work for their families and be able to fend for them. And lastly, for the Canadian government to actively engage the Zimbabwean government in order to set up, the right fiscal policies and support all the immigration to help Zimbabweans. With that, I'll pass you on to Makanaka, our next presenter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gumbriel. Thank you, Makanaka. You can start now. Hopefully your mic and internet are working okay.
Thank you. Good evening, once again, honorable members. As previously mentioned, my name is Makanaka Kajeke, and I will be presenting on the topic of basic necessities, beginning with the Zimbabwean healthcare system. So limited resources have resulted in bed shortages, staff shortages, as well as a lack of urgent care within the Zimbabwean healthcare system for many years. Staff shortages due to ongoing strikes have resulted in many preventable deaths. Most recently, 7 stillborn babies were delivered in one night following a delay in that urgent care that we discussed. Healthcare professionals are protesting their unlawful working conditions, which include lack of PPE, especially during a critical time like the COVID-19 pandemic, earning below living wage, approximately $130 monthly. And as a result of strikes, many of the healthcare workers in Zimbabwe were dismissed by the sitting government and were advised that they could only be reinstated if they joined the National Guard or the police force, which of course would mean surrendering their right to protest. Now, on the next slide, you'll see a civilian named Esther Zinyoro Gwena. Excuse me. So civilians such as Esther have taken it upon themselves to assist their communities as best as they can. Esther has successfully delivered 250 babies without gloves, equipment, or any midwifery or medical training. So women come to Esther's home, they deliver and they recover in her small apartment, and are often sent home the same day to make room for others. Moving on to the basic necessity of water. Zimbabwe has also been in a water and food, Zimbabwe has also been water and food insecure for many years. Families are often forced to drink and use sewage water because water does not flow in their homes. This, of course, results in many waterborne diseases such as cholera and typhoid. Recently, a cholera outbreak killed 10 people in Harare, which is the capital of Zimbabwe, who had consumed that contaminated water. And especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, a lack of reliable water supply has made maintaining preventative hygienic practices extremely difficult for Zimbabweans. Moving on to food insecurity, presently, 2.2 million Zimbabweans are on the brink of starvation due to food insecurity. The UN World Food Programme has forecasted that 3.3 million Zimbabweans will be food insecure by March 2021. The food insecurity is the result of climate change in the region and drought, food shortage, as well as a maladministration of resources. And across many regions, food aid is restricted to community members affiliated with certain political parties. So those who choose not to denounce their political affiliations are often threatened and denied access to rations. And finally,
Thank you. Thank you, Ms.
you.
Mujeke. We are going, I believe Ms. Gadza's now internet or microphone are working. Yes, can you start, please? Thank you.
Good evening, honorable members. Zimbabwe is facing non-democratic conditions to the extent that people cannot even exercise their right to engage in meaningful political activities. There is no freedom of association. As you can see in these 2 slides, a woman is being tackled to the ground by a police officer, and they're using tear gas, batons, and water cannons to disperse opposition party supporters who had gathered to listen to their leaders. In the next slide, you notice that there is these are people who are protesting as a result of prices in increase in food prices, in gasoline, and that is their way of survival. So in this case, they're exercising their right to protest price increases, but as a result, police surrounded and assaulted them. In the next slide, sexual abduction and inhumane assault has been a prevalent thing in Zimbabwe. The woman in bed is recovering after being sexually assaulted and beaten by police. The man on the right has lacerations on his back as a result of thrashing by police. He just happened to be an innocent bystander who got mixed up and got the wrath of the police handed over on him. There's been media outcry on the violence to the extent that the 2019 Human Rights Watch report exposed the Zimbabwean government's abuse of power on citizens. And as you can see in the slide to the left, those are media coverages by local media, and to the right, those are journalists who were being tried to be suppressed by police. Police raided their offices and threw tear gas canisters, discharged tear gas canisters on them as they were trying to be suppressed to report on the corruption and the violence that's going on in the country. Similar to the next slide, where we see a Zimbabwean journalist by the name of Hopwe Chingono, who was arrested for again publishing an article that exposed government corruption involving COVID-19 PPE supplies on the left, and to the right, he was again arrested in October for allegations that he breached his bail conditions. So all this goes to show that we strongly depend on the Canadian government to help us condemn police brutality by enforcing measures that reprimand non-compliant individuals, enforce human dignity, human rights, values, principles in the military, police force, and government intelligence, provide funding and training for police, reminding them of their duty to serve and to protect, restore the rule of law and ensure fair and equal legal representation, irrespective of gender, religion, or political affiliation, uphold the rule of law and ensure perpetrators will be accountable and brought before the courts as no one is above the law. Would also appreciate if the Canadian government could raise the Zimbabwean situation at the United Nations and African Union level. In our conclusion, we have realized that it is evident that corruption, poor government administration have driven Zimbabwe into the current predicament. As a result, we can conclude that all forms of funding, be it food distribution, be it medical services, should be channeled through non-governmental organization. Instead, there's the Canadian International Development Agency based in Harare that can assume responsibility to manage and report back to the Canadian government on funding matters. With all the information that we've shared with you this evening, we hope that the subcommittee will seriously consider proposed recommendations to ease economic hardship, improve supply and distribution of food, water, health, medical resources, aid the establishment of police reforms and restoration of the rule of law.
Thank you, Ms. Gadza. Thank you, and thank you to the witnesses. And now we're going to move to our questions in first round. In the first round, we have from the Liberals, Ms. Ikra Khalid for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for highlighting such an important issue. I will first and foremost ask, you lead this social media campaign, Zimbabwean Lives Matter. I would ask, is there any limitations on the ground in Zimbabwe, access to social media, or any interference in your advocacy by the state in you raising awareness? I'd ask Mr. Gambiro because I think you had mentioned it.
So thank you, honorable member. At the moment, we understand that the Zimbabwean government, has a stronghold on sort of all the infrastructure, whether it's telecoms, whether it's the media, the national television, including sort of the mobile networks. And as far as we understand, it's a case of when people try to protest together through social media or bring awareness, they are targeted. I think Ms. Tsitsigadza did speak to sort of abductions, people being raped for being activists. The one reporter, which, you would think because of journalism and independence in journalism, that they would be sort of out of touch and out of reach. But the Zimbabwean government has been able to take Hopewell and put him in prison just for bringing light to the truth. And, so in response, I would say, the government is heavily involved in sort of all the media platforms in Zimbabwe, which affect and bias sort of the response from the Zimbabwean people.
Thank you for that, Mr. Gambiro. I will turn to Ms. Gadza now, who is a constituent, and I'm very happy to have her here today. Ms. Gadza, you had mentioned in one of your recommendations that it is prudent for the government of Canada to connect with NGOs operating on the ground directly instead of with the government of Zimbabwe with respect to providing aid. Can you outline for us the restrictions or the ability to mobilize for NGOs on the ground? What is their situation like as they try to fill in the gaps with respect to food security and water, sanitation, etc.?
Thank you, Honorable Member. From my experience as a UNICEF employee back up when I was in Zimbabwe, UNICEF, which was a non-governmental organization, there were also ties to the government. Any programs that we ran through UNICEF, be it education, be it health, be it water and sanitation, had to be channeled through government. So in this case, given that the government itself is corrupt, that's why we're proposing that we would have Canadian International Development Agencies, which would be accountable to the Canadian government. Because if funding is provided through non-governmental organizations, the onus is on the non-governmental organization to work with the government in place. But with Canadian International Development Agency, they are accountable to the Canadian government. So we are confident that that channel would facilitate delivery and distribution of the services that we're asking to alleviate the poverty and the situation that is in Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Gadza. Ms. Kucheki, I'll turn to you next. Now, with respect to, and you outlined a lot about the history and the context of what is happening in Zimbabwe, I'll ask, over the past number of years, what has the international response been like? I know one of the recommendations is to involve the international community, including the United Nations, to raise awareness and to condemn the actions that are happening in Zimbabwe. If you can outline for us what measures have been taken over the past, and in what ways would a condemnation impact what is happening on the ground in Zimbabwe?
Thank you, Honorable Member. So as noted in the background, there has been radio silence from neighboring countries such as Zambia, South Africa, Botswana on the situation in Zimbabwe regarding all failures, healthcare systems, food and water insecurity, economic crisis. There has been aid provided by the United Nations World Food Program. Currently, they do support 20 regions, and they're able to reach approximately 550,000 Zimbabweans. But compared to the 2.2 million that we discussed earlier that are food and water insecure, that's a very small percentage of the population. We believe that condemning the current state of affairs, especially when it comes to the basic necessities as food and water, would allow the international community to recognize the severity of the food crisis, especially in Zimbabwe. As the UN Food WFP has mentioned, we're approaching 3.3 million who will be on the brink of starvation, which is a very significant amount of the population itself. So we feel that highlighting and condemning what is going on in Zimbabwe would allow for at least responsibility in part of the government, if anything else, to know that the international community does care about Zimbabwe and the state of its citizens.
Very quickly, any comments on the role of the African Union with Zimbabwe?
The African Union has also turned a blind eye to the situation in Zimbabwe. They were involved previously, but as the crises have become worse, Zimbabwe has become very much, the term has been from breadbasket to basket case, and that's really that's felt across the African Union and in many countries globally.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Kajeke.
Thank you. And now we'll move to the Conservatives with Mr. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I'll start with Ms. Kajeke also. With regard to the African Union, what is the reason for that approach? Is it just kind of a conclusion that Zimbabwe is just so badly misgoverned there's no point in trying, or is there something else that's at the heart of that motivation to just stand by and do nothing?
Thank you, honorable member. I believe that is the case. I believe that resistance felt by any previous attempts to assist when Zimbabwe was in a better state have led to a scaled back approach in the assistance that the African Union provides. Given that many of the countries within the African Union earned their independence, I think that there's also a need to provide them the feeling of independence, or a feeling as though they are sovereign states, which they are. And so when there's resistance, I believe that the African Union will never force themselves onto any nation. And so they've really stepped back and allowed the situation to unfold the way it has. And there hasn't been any repercussions from neighboring countries, and also as a whole from the Union.
What about the Commonwealth as an alternative international forum? I understand the concerns that come from Africa's heritage as a colonized continent, a very exploited continent. But the Commonwealth does contain a number of significant players who are also African. And it seems to me that combined with a high degree of respect for concepts like the rule of law might cause this to be another international venue that might be more helpful. And I also add, in saying this, that I can't help but notice that your own organization appears to have a very high degree of support from people who are following it in the United Kingdom, including a number of very prominent people in the UK. So it suggests that there's a high degree of interest already in Zimbabwe in at least that part of the Commonwealth.
Thank you once again, honorable member. If I may I also include my witness and other panelists in order to best answer your question?
Yes, that's a good idea. I don't actually know to whom to address these questions because I'm not sure who has the expertise. So whoever is best suited. Is that Ms. Gadza? I think I see you waving.
Yes, thank you, honorable member. I'll chime in. Zimbabwe was once a member of the Commonwealth, but has since been kicked out of the Commonwealth, why this is the reason why the Commonwealth is maintaining an arm's length distance away from Zimbabwe when it comes to the situation in Zimbabwe. But with regards to the African Union, there's that feeling of brotherhood, to the extent that any other country within Africa, even if it's going through its turmoil, if it's nothing to be condemned, if it's not that it has not been condemned by the outside world, they just stay mum about the situation. It's not like the African Union have not heard about the fatalities and the human rights violations in Zimbabwe. They have, but they chose to turn a blind eye. A good example would be African Union was vocal when there were, police brutalities in the US in the summer. But the same brutalities are going on in front of their eyes in Zimbabwe, but they choose not to comment or say anything about it. So they kind of pick and choose what they want to talk about and what they want to highlight. And if it's a case of other countries just being suffering and being reduced to poverty to the extent that Zimbabwe has been reduced, they're okay with that. That's our approach. That's how we feel.
And is that part of the reason for the name Zim Lives Matter, to make the point that police brutality is equally awful regardless of where geographically the victims are located?
You're absolutely correct, honorable member, because any life matter, any life, it doesn't matter whether it's a Zimbabwean, it's American, it's Northern Africa, any life matter. But in this particular case, we're trying to maintain the same process that has been carried on around the world to say every life matter. But in this case, with particular reference to Zimbabwe, is they face exactly the same police brutality and experiencing the same fatalities that any other nation is experiencing globally.
Thank you. And Mr. Gombero, maybe I should ask you the next question. I'm looking at the issue of inflation in Zimbabwe. This is not the first time this has happened. Everybody is familiar with the hyperinflation that took place about a decade ago. And at the end of that process, forgive me, I don't have the right year, perhaps it was 2013, the government made the decision to move to the United States dollar as the currency. And then in, I think it's May or June of 2019, the Zimbabwean dollar was reintroduced, and almost instantly there was massive inflation, which seems to be getting worse and worse. And I suppose I'm wondering, number one, why did they go back to the Zimbabwean dollar? And number two, is the problem identical to what happened last time? They're just printing more and more money, or is there something else that's going on?
Honorable Member, thank you for that question. It's twofold as far as I want to believe and understand. Number one is that you know, when we switch from the Zimbabwean dollar to the US dollar is predominantly what countries trade in, and because there's no production, there's no manufacturing, the only way that the Zimbabwean government can sort of transact with other countries, whether it's the EU or World Bank, pay off their debts, is through the US dollar. So when they print money, they're printing money so that they can buy the hard currency that's on the market, on the black market. And so that's why you see the seesaw sort of policies that have no foresight, have no concern for the people of Zimbabwe, but just in terms of, you know, self-enrichment for the political elite, whether it's the individuals in senior government officials, and that's what we believe is happening, and you will likely see a change if we don't start acting.
Thank you, Mr. Reid. That's the time. Yeah, I know it goes
quick. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks
Yeah.
to the witnesses. Yes.
Thank you. And so we'll move over to now the block and Madame LaRouche.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for your testimonies. Thank you to the witnesses who are confirming the very severe situation in Zimbabwe. And it's a threat to many countries, to security in your country and in others. I would like to hear more on the Zimbabwean community in Canada. There's other diaspora who are being bullied online or in person by other people in person or online. So you are a strong voice for your community. So do you feel, or some of your colleagues are going through pressure, bullying? Could you tell us, is there espionage, violence? Is that current practice for people who come from Zimbabwe and are in other countries?
Sorry, Honorable Member, was that just for any one of us? Or
Oui, pardon, j'ai pas précisé.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't say who. It could be you or any of your colleagues. It deals with anybody from your country, yourself, or somebody from your country that you know have gone through this situation.
So maybe what I'll say briefly before I hand it over to Ms. Kadza is that you know, as a community, to begin with, there's not a lot of us because the immigration policies haven't always supported, you know, bringing Zimbabweans or at least as many Zimbabweans as we would like, partly because of the geography. We're some 28 hours away by flight from Zimbabwe. So that ticket alone, just to get a ticket price, a ticket to come to Canada is quite pricey on the local community, as well as just organizing visas. And then the second thing is when we come to Canada, you know, we're trying to establish ourselves, very different culture, a very different sort of way of living, you know, which is supposed to be the way that it is because of differing backgrounds. However, with that said, you know, we've found that Canada has become a home, especially for some of us who are quite fortunate to have made the way from Zimbabwe. And with that, I'll pass it on to maybe Ms. Kadza.
Thank you, Mr. Kombiro. Honorable member, my interpreter is not working. I'm sorry. So I didn't quite understand the question.
Parfait. Je vais donc passer à ce moment-là tout de suite à ma deuxième.
So I'll go to my second question because my question is for Mrs. Kujeki. Your testimony was very relevant and sad. I would like, how could parliamentarians from how can women and young children, how do they receive international assistance? Do you feel that, why do you feel that some of the problems are having a deeper impact on women and children in Zimbabwe?
Thank you, honorable member. I believe that women and children are facing the brunt of many of the crises in Zimbabwe, especially children, given how reliant. Oh, my apologies. May I continue, honorable member?
Oui, pardon, allez-y.
Please.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Given how reliant children are on the healthcare system, having hospitals that are closed or only deemed good for the elite, where there are high costs to pay for children needing assistance or women who need to deliver their children needing assistance, they do face the brunt of a lot of the crises that are occurring. Also, given that any single parent households where it's just mothers and their children who may be unable to find employment because of the high unemployment rate, because they might be in rural communities, they are forced to make good with whatever resources they're given, whether that is rations in which they might have to denounce any political affiliations, whether that is having to use sewage water, having to use buckets and having to reuse the same water in order to maintain cleanliness for their children, in order to cook their meals and to just maintain their households. And so, honorable member, we feel that Canada, the Canadian government, partnering with the UNWFP in order to expand the program that currently assists those 20 regions and currently is able to assist those 550,000 Zimbabweans that we mentioned, we feel like that would take a large amount of the burden off of these women and children who might be single family homes, who might be dual parent homes. And it would allow them to focus on meeting any other basic needs that they might have. Another topic that we weren't able to touch on, unfortunately, was electricity. And often 40% of the community receives electricity of all of Zimbabwe. Another 60% doesn't receive any electricity at all. And the 40% that does receive, they are subjected to 18 hours a day of load shedding, in which, and then when electricity does return to these homes, children and families must arise and they must make their meals for the day. Children must complete any schoolwork that they have to, and this is usually at 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and only for about an hour. And so Zimbabwe is actually part of the Southern African Power Pool, and we feel like if the Canadian government was to condemn Zimbabwe for not meeting the objectives of the Southern African Power Pool, which do include sustainable development, providing reliable and efficient electricity, and providing electricity to those rural communities, just that condemnation would be enough, or would start something great in which Zimbabwe would feel that the international community is really keeping an eye on the goings on of the nation to ensure that all civilians are receiving the basic necessities that they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kujeki. And now we're going to be moving to the NDP, and this will be our last questioner for this panel, and that's Monsieur Belloris.
Mr. Belloris, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the three witnesses who are with us this evening. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us and for all the work that you do. I do understand that unemployment, poverty, misery, it revolts me, and people being hungry, that we do realize that the protesters are being suppressed by the police, so there's police brutality. I'd like to understand what the general terms are for the magnitude of violation of human rights. Is it torture? Is it unusual length of punishment? Or these are all important issues. Perhaps one or two of you could talk about this particular issue, please.
Thank you, Honorable Member. So there have been human rights violations such as torture.
I think we froze. Maybe I'll take that on, Honorable Member, and thank you for your question, and thank you for having us. There has been a lot of human rights violations, including torture, people being abducted. We understand, and obviously we're not present, in some of these situations. You only have to see the pictures, some of which we've shared with you, of the nature of the extremity of the violations. We have people being abducted, we have people being incarcerated with no particular reason, sometimes political, but isn't the very nature of freedom and freedom of speech to be able to express yourself without being put under undue pressure. But this is what every Zimbabwean faces, especially the local community, the local people, with the exception of the elite, because they are the ones sort of calling the shots and imposing all of this harshness on the people of Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your answer. You suggested that the Canadian government provide assistance, try to help the human and economic situation of the Zimbabweans, not necessarily by going through the government, which is the problem, it's corrupt, but to go through the NGOs. Do you think that there are humanitarian groups or community groups that are sufficiently independent from the government so that they would be able to provide this aid effectively?
Unfortunately, and thank you for your question, Your Honor. Unfortunately, that is not quite the case. Again, as much as they may be independent, they may respond back to the Canadian government. They are still in Zimbabwe. They are still in the territory of Zimbabwe, and so as much as we can try, as much as we can have the Canadian government, I think it would require almost lateral conversations with the Canadian government, with the Zimbabwean government, in addition to sort of humanitarian organizations being on the ground, assisting sort of the acute need for water, acute need for food, acute need for shelter, in order to assist that. And maybe with that, I'll pass it on to witness Tsitsi Gadza to maybe elaborate more. But I think this is not a one solution sort of issue. We need to approach it sort of multi-dimensional, if I have to say.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Thank you, Honorable Member. Just to reinforce that Zimbabwe is not a country that is reliant on donations or distribution. Zimbabwe is made up of hardworking people. But it turns out that due to the environmental changes, climate change, and the economic environment, as well as the poverty that has hit the country, that's why people have had to get to the extent that they are in. And also because of the poor administration, the government administration that is there, that is corrupt, that has led people not to be able to live comfortably, be able to live within their means, to the extent that a lot of people have had to leave the country. There's a lot of brain drain as a result, not because they don't want to be in Zimbabwe. I, for one, would be the one person to go back home if the situation would get better. But because of the economic conditions, I have to fend for myself and I have to fend for my family. I still have family that is back home, and my heart bleeds, and it's heart-wrenching just to see the conditions, the poverty, the health, the deteriorating health systems in Zimbabwe. So that's why we are coming before the Canadian government, before the committee, to find out if there's any help that we can get to alleviate and improve the way of life for the people in Zimbabwe. And I should apologize. My English translation, my French translation is not working properly, and I've been working with IT to get this resolved. So I may not have answered this fully, but this is the best that I could do based on the handover that I got from Mr. Gombiro. I apologize.
Très bien, merci. Peut-être, je sais pas.
Thank you very much. I don't know if the other witness would like, in the 30 seconds remaining, to add to the answer. Merci beaucoup. Merci.
So that will conclude this panel, and I want to just thank the witnesses for coming forward, for informing us on the current situation in Zimbabwe and what is happening there. You did amazing, even with all the hiccups we had with the different technological hiccups. But it was terrific, and we will see what we can do as a committee to be able to see if our analysts have the opportunity to get a statement together for your group and the situation that's taking place in Zimbabwe. On that, we're going to conclude, and members, we will be going in camera from here, so we will be suspending at this time. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in camera.
Good to
you.